On the 30th of March, 1867, the United States Secretary of State William H. Seward signed a treaty with Russian imperial representatives transferring the territory of Russian America, approximately 1,718,000 square kilometers of subarctic and Arctic land on the northwestern corner of the North American continent, to the United States for the sum of $7.2 million. $7.2 million. Approximately 2 cents per acre. The American press, surveying this transaction, was not impressed. Editorialists described the acquisition as Seward's Folly and Seward's Icebox. The territory was characterized as a frozen wasteland of no commercial or strategic value, populated primarily by ice, bears, and indigenous peoples who were not consulted about the transfer. The New York Tribune questioned why the United States needed to purchase a sucked orange. The New York World called it a barren, worthless, God-forsaken region. The Senate ratified the treaty. The money was paid. And over the following 150 years, the Folly acquired oil reserves that have generated hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, became the physical embodiment of the United States' status as an Arctic nation, contributed to the strategic encirclement of what would become the Soviet Union, and served as a reminder that the assessment of territorial value is hostage to the limits of contemporary knowledge. To understand why Russia sold, you need to understand Russia's strategic situation in 1867 with some precision. Russia had been managing Russian America, the territory that is now Alaska, for approximately a century through the Russian-American Company, a charter trading company modeled on the British East India Company, whose primary business was the fur trade. Sea otter pelts in particular had been extraordinarily valuable in the Asian market. But by the mid-19th century, the sea otter populations had been hunted to near commercial extinction. The fur trade was declining, and the Russian-American Company was struggling financially. The territory was also indefensible. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 had demonstrated the limits of Russian military power against British and French forces. Russian America was separated from Russia itself by the entire width of the Pacific Ocean, with no possibility of rapid reinforcement. In the event of a war with Britain, whose imperial territory in Canada abutted Russian America, Russia would lose the territory quickly and without any ability to resist. The Russian government, under Alexander II and his foreign minister Eduard Stoeckel, made a strategic calculation that was, in retrospect, entirely rational. Sell the territory before losing it in a war, receive hard currency that could fund domestic modernization, and rid Russia of a liability that cost more to maintain than it returned. The preferred buyer was the United States, for reasons of both geography and politics. American control of Alaska would prevent British territorial consolidation along the Pacific coast of North America. Russia and the United States had maintained a broadly cooperative relationship. The Russian naval squadrons that visited American ports during the Civil War had been read by many Americans as a signal of Russian support for the Union cause, though historians now assess this as primarily a Russian move to position their fleet away from potential British or French interdiction. Selling to America served Russian interests better than allowing the territory to be lost to Britain. Seward, for his part, needed very little persuading. He was an ardent expansionist who had been arguing for American acquisition of territories in the Pacific and Arctic for years. He understood, with a clarity that most of his contemporaries lacked, that the Pacific was going to become a major arena of American strategic interest, and that controlling the Northern Pacific coastline had long-term value that was difficult to quantify in the present but would accumulate over time. The political obstacle was domestic. The purchase required Senate ratification and House appropriation. The Senate ratified the treaty relatively quickly. The House, responsible for appropriating the money, was more resistant, and there were credible allegations, never fully resolved, that Russian agents disbursed a portion of the purchase price in the form of payments to American lobbyists and possibly members of Congress to secure the votes needed. The immediate practical consequences of the purchase were modest. The territory was administered initially by the Army, then by the Navy, then by the Treasury Department's Revenue Cutter Service, in a prolonged period of governmental uncertainty about what exactly Alaska was and what to do with it. It was not organized as a formal territory until 1884. The first significant demonstration that the purchase had commercial value came with the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896. Technically in Canadian territory, but the primary access route ran through Alaska, and Alaskan ports became the jumping-off point for the gold rush economy. An estimated 100,000 prospectors passed through Alaska in the gold rush years, transforming Skagway from a handful of buildings to a city virtually overnight. The more durable commercial value arrived with oil. The Prudhoe Bay oil field, discovered in 1968 on Alaska's North Slope, proved to be the largest oil field ever discovered in North America. Production began in 1977 with the completion of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, 800 miles of pipeline running from Prudhoe Bay to the ice-free Port of Valdez on Prince William Sound, one of the great engineering achievements of its era. The field has produced roughly 18 billion barrels of oil since production began, at prices that have ranged from under $10 to over $100 per barrel. The Alaska Permanent Fund, established in 1976 to manage a fraction of the oil revenues for the long-term benefit of Alaska's residents, had accumulated a value of approximately $73 billion by the mid-2020s. The state of Alaska has paid its residents an annual dividend from the fund every year since 1982. The strategic dimension of the Alaska purchase is harder to quantify, but arguably more consequential than the economic one. The purchase made the United States an Arctic nation, a fact with no particular significance in 1867 and increasing significance with every decade that passes as Arctic sea ice retreats and Arctic shipping routes, Arctic resource development, and Arctic military positioning become more salient to global power competition. During the Cold War, Alaska was the closest American territory to the Soviet Union, separated at the Bering Strait by roughly 85 kilometers of water between the Alaskan and Russian mainland. The Diomede Islands, 2 islands in the middle of the Bering Strait, are separated by approximately 4 kilometers of water and by the international date line. Little Diomede is American territory. Big Diomede is Russian territory. The communities on these islands are, in an entirely literal sense, neighbors across one of the most consequential geopolitical divides in modern history. The military infrastructure built in Alaska during and after the Second World War, the early warning radar systems, the Air Force bases, the Army installations, formed a critical component of American strategic deterrence during the Cold War. The same geography that made Alaska difficult for Russia to defend in 1867 made it an ideal forward position for the United States to monitor and respond to Soviet activities in the Pacific and Arctic. The contemporaries who called it Seward's Folly were not stupid people making an obvious error. They were applying rational analysis to the information available to them in 1867, which did not include knowledge of the Prudhoe Bay oil field, the strategic value of Arctic positioning in a world where long-range aviation and intercontinental ballistic missiles would make proximity to Russia militarily relevant, or the geopolitical trajectory of the Pacific as the center of global economic gravity. What they could not see was that value is not static. Territory that is worthless under one technological regime, one economic structure, and one geopolitical configuration can become immensely valuable when those parameters change. Seward's conviction that Alaska had long-term strategic value was not based on any specific knowledge of oil or geopolitics. It was based on a general principle that controlling territory, particularly territory that extends American presence in an important direction, is worth doing even when the specific future benefits cannot be articulated. 2 cents per acre. The roughly 730,000 square miles of Alaska. The Russian government received the equivalent of approximately $130 million in 2025 terms. The oil revenues alone that have flowed from Alaska's fields since 1977 dwarf this figure by multiple orders of magnitude. The press that called it a folly was wrong. What is instructive is why they were wrong, and what kind of thinking would have led to a different assessment.